right? Because now there's a consequence that goes along with it. So every every thought's going to lead to a feeling, right? How your emotions are showing up turns out in a behavior. Now, if that's a maladaptive behavior, we have a negative consequence. If that's a behavior that is fully functional in the ways that create positivity, we have a positive consequence.
Right.
So the negative consequence of making that choice not to vote gave us what we now have is no more affirmative action.
Right.
For those who believe in abortion, we don't have the right to an abortion, right? For those who wanted to vote, we now are in a place where our voting rights are being diminished.
Awesome. Welcome back to the CVMK show, because it is what it is. I am your host, Cody Kelly himself, Mr. CVMK 33 on the gram. Look, we have an amazing leader with us today. We're going to be talking about mental health, trauma, dealing with the societal facts, right? And how to really be the best versions of ourselves. We're going to be addressing it from a mental health perspective. So I brought in a professional, Dr. Jeannelle Perkins-Muhammad, who is going to educate us and inform us, because I don't know. I'm not a trained anything. trained anything. I'm not. This isn't my expertise, and I don't want to mislead anybody. And I believe when it comes to subject matters, you should bring in the subject matter professional. I think everybody can agree on that, right? So, CVMK family, help me welcome Dr. Jeannelle. Dr. Jeannelle, how are you doing today?
Hi there. I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm blessed. It's great to see you again. It's great to have you on here. Super excited about just the whole episode. I think it's so needed. So much has happened since the last time we chatted. I mean, the overturning of affirmative action to just everything. It is everything.
Interesting world we're in today.
Very interesting. So we need help, and I believe I've come to the right one. So for those who may not be familiar with your work, or maybe not be familiar with you, just give a brief introduction, and then we'll begin the line of questioning.
Sure. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, a psychotherapist, and a supervisor here in the state of South Carolina. I am licensed in Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida as well. And the work that I do really begins with looking at how we are connecting with our society and the emotions that we have around everything that's happening around us. So how we think, how we feel, and then of course how we behave, and how that impacts the relationships we have, whether it's in our professional or our personal lives. So I like to dig in deep and really get the systemic perspective of who we are, and then what we need to do to take it to the next level.
I like it. And we're gonna uncover that. We're gonna talk about the systemic root of all this and how we should respond. But just a quick word from our sponsors.
There's a hero in all of us, waiting to be unleashed. All it takes is just that one last push. Activate the hero within with CVMK Global Supplements. All natural, steroid-free, designed to enhance performance, build muscle, and increase energy. You are unstoppable. You can do this. Become your own hero at www.cvmkglobal.store.
All right, y'all, www.cvmkglobal.store. You get your protein, transform, the BCAA saucy, the creatine, super thick, warrior thirst, pre-workout, superpower, all at www.cvmkglobal.store. Okay, so before we go into that, I always like to start off with the why, right? Like, why does anyone anything.
Mhm.
Because I think the why is absolutely important, right? When understanding problem solving, purpose led to problem solving, purpose led activity
Mhm.
to problem solving. So, why did you get into psychotherapy?
Well, it's really interesting. I have a family that's deeply rooted in church and spirituality.
Yeah.
My parents were ministers, and so they ran our marriage excellence and our finance ministry. So I had this fly on the wall kind of bird's eye view of things that were happening in families within our church that I thought to myself, well, it's interesting because we have this incredible grasp for the spiritual nature of things, but there's something that's missing. What is that? And I decided after I got my bachelor's a few years later to go back and get my master's in marriage and family therapy. And I realized that it made sense for me to do that because we are narrative in the way that we converse with one another. We tell stories, right? And so marriage and family therapy is about that systemic perspective. How did we get to this place where we are? And I said, okay, now I get it. There are some principles around change that we don't know. And it has to do with the practical steps to how to actually communicate with one another. So we got the word, and the word helps us in terms of our spirits.
Right.
But then there's that emotional piece that goes along with the experience that we've had that then makes us behave in a certain way. And while the spiritual says, here's how you're supposed to behave, we didn't always know what to do with the thoughts and the feelings that came along before we even got to that behavior. And it happens instantaneously. It's so quick. So I said, I'm going back to school. I'm going to figure this thing out. I did in my master's program. And then someone said to me, you know, what you're saying makes sense, but you know how we are as a people. Unless you are doctor, reverend, bishop, nobody's going to hear you. And I said, got it. I'm going to spend the money to become doctor so that I can get a deeper level of understanding and then create more people who think like me for us. And so I decided I was going to become Dr. Jeannelle rather than Jeannelle, marriage and family therapist.
I like it. That's clear and concise. Your background, I feel like, mirrors mine as far as the spiritual upbringing and seeing this. I won't say disconnect. I think that might be a bit shallow. But seeing Sunday and looking at Monday through Saturday and saying the days aren't speaking, and it's not necessarily an issue of character as it is an issue of collaboration
and knowledge.
Right.
And knowledge. That's the key. Some of the principles that I talk about when I have clients who come through my doors or when I'm doing a massive workshop, people walk up to me and say, oh my goodness, I never realized that these are just thoughts. Like they don't have to control me. I never even thought about it like I can choose how I feel. Like you don't make me feel anything. I can actually say, I choose not to be a part of that, or I choose not to try to control someone, because that's really what we try to do a lot of the time, is to control the other person. Because most of the people who walk into my office go, make him or make her do something different.
Right.
I can't do that. I don't have the ability to do that. I can help you figure out what you need to do in order to either manage or cope or remove yourself from a particular situation. But there's no way I can control another person. That would be akin to witchcraft.
True. Well stated. Absolutely true. I couldn't have said it any better. So let's talk about those systemic issues. Are we products of our environment, or do we just simply respond to the facts? Right? Like, I feel like as I have aged, not that most things are conditional, but the conditions will influence behavior without a shadow of a doubt. And I used to didn't accept that, and then I became an adult and started paying bills and started to realize I was really naive in some of my understandings. Breaking down systemic causes, and particularly when personal development, when does it start, and when do we need to say you need help?
Well, honestly, I'm going to go back to in utero.
Sure.
Truly in utero, because the things that you speak over a child in utero, the things that you're experiencing yourself, are all impacting that child before they're even born. So we could go all the way back there, and that's a whole nother level of thinking.
Right.
But even when we think about when we're born and we're in those preschool, or even, the infant stage and preschool stage, and then of course going into elementary, et cetera, we are truly only born with 6 emotions. 6. Think about that for a minute. That is fear, disgust, anger, happiness, sadness, and then you have what is akin to like anxiety, if you will, right? That's all we have, those 6. After that, we have to be taught the rest of them. So when you talk about the systemic nature of what we experience, we have to go all the way back to slavery. We weren't even allowed to have our own emotions. We could only feel whatever the master told us we were allowed to feel.
Right.
So throughout generations, and I'm not saying everybody because we're not monolithic in our approaches to anything whatsoever, but throughout generation after generation, we have learned anger for the most part, fear, sadness, happiness here and there. But most people will tell you, at least when they come across me, I hear, I haven't been happy in so long. We don't know what happiness looks like. And when I reveal to them moments where they were happy, it's shocking to them because I didn't know that's what that was. Okay, so how do we get back to that? How do you experience that again? Even if it was in childhood, who told you that wasn't happiness? Who told you that was anger? Who told you you had to express it in that way? So, chicken or the egg, it's kind of hand in hand. It's both of those. We really have a biological perspective in terms of how we've been raised and what we experience in some pre-existing conditions. And then we have the environmental. It gets deep.
It does. When we look at that environmental, because I do totally agree. I think it's, as you said, from conception, really speaking over the seed and the power that has. But then we deal with, I feel like, call and response.
For sure.
It's I don't know if I've ever, at least within the American context, believed not like it wasn't going to get better, but this almost, whether we like to admit it or not, this fear of it all ending. And we could talk about, eschatology, but without getting into that, how as human beings, right, when we watch the news, and the news to me is depressing. Like, I can only take an hour max because I feel like it's the same stories. I feel like, another institution has failed, somebody has committed a crime against humanity, some awful thing happened, and the world is just getting increasingly hotter, right? It's like it's the same track. How should we respond? Can we be just data gatherers and not have a moral response to it?
I don't know if that's possible, to just be gatherers without a response.
Okay.
But I teach a course that's actually called Strategic Emotional Resilience. And it is about recognizing what is true, what is a fact, and what you're interpreting, right? It's about then doing an analysis of what is the emotion that I'm attaching to that, and then what is the response that I'm going to have. Now, for most people, the emotion and the response come very quickly whenever anything happens in society, good, bad, or indifferent, right? But emotions are not good or bad. They just are. So you then get to decide, how am I going to behave as a result? our bodies are not built for the level of negativity that we receive on a regular basis, but we have gotten used to it. It's neuroplasticity. It's that muscle that we have built that says we have to have this negativity to function. And oftentimes, if you remove yourself from it, you find yourself for a while drawn back and back until you finally say, I am not doing this any longer. So turning off the television makes a lot of sense. Being able to be abreast of what's happening in the world is necessary, but you have to monitor how much of that you take in, because your nervous system, your limbic system, is not built to sustain the level of negative energy that we take in on a regular basis. So in all actuality, we have no choice but to respond, because our system's going to respond.
So if we're basically living in a wasteland, it's so many words, and our systems are not designed organically to thrive in this hostile environment. I mean, obviously, as a believer myself, as a Christian, I would say, well, repent, and for the kingdom of God is at hand. We can, whether whatever, but we could call it cliche, we can say whatever. But I think not beyond, but in conjunction with that, I think there are some practical identifiers. And would you say that no matter who it is, most people are not emotionally developed? Like, there's a lack of emotional maturity or intelligence.
Maturity.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think it goes back to the fact that we don't recognize that we only have those 6 emotions until someone helps us develop the others. Empathy, you notice, was not one of the emotions I expressed as being the 6th. So if you're not taught how to empathize, then automatically you sit in a space where you can't even begin to truly care for or about what's happening to a people. So when you think about, for example, how slavery turned into the Black Codes and then turned into Jim Crow, and then because for years, empathy toward a people of darker hue of skin was not taught. So if you think about it from that perspective and you take it into the space where I work, which is a lot of relationships, if you as a man or I as a woman have not been taught what it is to be kind and empathetic toward one another, because we're in battle with one another, then that's what we're going to do. So what we need to do then is to find out, what is it that I have to do for the person that I'm in connection with, whether it's at work, whether it's my mama, my daddy, my cousins, my play friends down the street who I call family, right? Our fictive kin, if you will. How do I need to respond to them? What do I need to ask in order to know what they need? How do I tell people that I'm hurt? How do I express that I'm vulnerable?
Sure.
So that we can then get to a place where we recognize what it is to truly be empathetic to one another, to truly show kindness, appreciation, love, adoration, to pull one another in those moments of weakness. Because vulnerability is your greatest strength.
Yeah.
Hear me when I say your greatest strength is to be vulnerable. And if you cannot be, then you are at your weakest.
You would think that would be achieved in church, right? Or you would think that if vulnerability, and if the whole essence of salvation is that you couldn't save yourself, the Lord would have had to, like, that is total depravity, is vulnerability, right? Like, to the highest level. But it seems like, I think human beings have this natural tendency to invert weakness instead of to be honest and to allow it to be transformed, right? I think we invert it. So it's like, if my weakness is time management, instead of exploring why I suck at time management. I invert it, and therefore everything is clockwork, but it's really a forced behavior that isn't a true sign of me having this as a strength.
Well, I think the key is what you said about it being a natural tendency. It's not natural. We were told that's what we needed to do. The natural tendency was to cry, was to say, I'm in pain, was to say, this doesn't feel good, or I'm not doing well. That's the natural tendency. But if you think about it, when you fell as a child and you skinned your knee and it was painful, someone said to you, you're okay, get up, come on, we are right. Instead of saying, oh my goodness, that must hurt so much. Come here, let me hold you.
Sure.
Cry if you must. I'm gonna put this salve on it and it's gonna burn, and I don't mind if you scream. That wasn't what was said. So the natural tendency is to be vulnerable. We were told we cannot be vulnerable.
So do you? I gotta cook a few questions that I want to add on to that, and then I'm gonna throw this little caveat. Let me take a quick word from our sponsor. Hey, what's up? It's CVMK33. Look, I want you to subscribe, hit the notification bell, subscribe here, everywhere, so you can get the latest and greatest of this podcast content. Stay tuned. Y'all subscribe, hit share, the notification bell. YouTube at CVMK. Instagram, CVMK_global, CVMK33. It is what it is _show. And where the best supplements are, www.cvmkglobal.store. So we're talking about this reprogramming, and that's what we're essentially addressing. It's hard to, I think what a Nicodemus asked Jesus, can a man re-enter into, his mother's womb? And this struggle with regeneration, right? Like, how do we take an adult? This person has been in existence for 30 plus years. They have a set way of doing everything, whether they agree to it or not. It is a behavior learned and or applied. And now we're saying it's totally wrong. It was birthed out of a deformed sense of control. It is utterly stoked in white supremacist values, and you have to now relearn A, B, and C. Right?
So first of all, I'm not saying it's totally wrong.
Okay.
People are coming and saying this isn't working.
Yeah.
So there's an acknowledgement that something is not working. And so once that acknowledgement takes place, that's when you have the potential for the greatest change. So it's at that moment that I can then say, let me show you how this is a cognitive distortion. Let me show you how this is something you've been told all your life, and you need to rewrite the narrative, reframe the cognitive space that you're functioning out of. And that takes time. If you're 50 years old, 52 for some of us, right? Then you now have this written across your spirit for 52 years. So the same way that the word says that faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God, right. Faith comes by reading something different. Faith comes by speaking something different. Faith comes by hearing something different, because it's not just the word of God that got you to this place. It's many words that got to this place. And so that's why, like in my book, I talk about the fact that this is the relationship you've always wanted. I literally say, this is not your mom and daddy's relationship. This ain't your grandmama's relationship. What do you want? How do you want this to function? So when people come to me, they are telling me this is not working and I need to do something different. And I'm saying, let's figure out together what something different looks like. And that's when the greatest change takes place. It doesn't take 52 years for change to happen when you know something's not right.
Are we monetized to be toxic? And the reason why I ask, chaos can only thrive if there is some type of end game of value, right? Like if chaos was ultimately chaotic, everything would just implode and then it would just kind of eat away at each other. It'd be like like organisms eating at each other, and therefore nothing would grow, nothing would establish. It would just be utter chaos, for lack of a better word. But it seems like this chaos is more than manipulative. It's funded. It's like it's set up for the end user to be the one, to be the consumer of it. And I know I wrote you and I said, the danger of self-healing. And I'm getting to it, I think a lot of people are upset, at everything, the way the country's going, the way politics are going. You got you got the left fighting the right fighting the left, the middle torn in between, because it's like we get some of this, we don't get that, and everybody seems to be at odds. And I think what happens is when there's hurt and no apparent salve, we go to artificial medicines or pseudo pharmaceuticals, and we start looking for voices and echo chambers to speak to our pain, even if they're making us sicker. And I really think that, it's a very dangerous, I call it the era of false prophecy. Like it's a dangerous, it's a lot
They've always existed. They have always existed.
They have always existed. But it seems like it's more monetized now. Like, and maybe in my head.
Well, sure, because we're a capitalist society, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about systemic, institutionalized, and, structural racism that gets monetized as well. So sure, the negativity that's being perpetuated is certainly, for some people, a way to go about creating wealth for themselves. What we have to then do is to recognize that that's happening in some instances, and then decide what we want to do. We are not puppets that are just moved along if we don't want to be. You have to choose to be in that space. And in all actuality, choice exists for every person. I can contribute to the way you feel, but I cannot make you feel anything. You can choose whether or not you will. What we've done is just decided to hand over our choice in many cases. And what I'm finding is more people are wanting to take it back. And in doing so, they're beginning to say, what do I do differently? What can I do that changes the dynamics of my family, my work environment, my personal life, my relationships? And when I begin to make those adjustments to understand what my standards are and what my boundaries are, now I'm seeing people around me move and function differently across the board.
So we talk about the power of choice, right? And we address it and say, like, we have the option to participate, or we have the option to withdraw. Is there such thing as a false choice?
Well, if you don't participate where you're needed, then you've made a false choice. So, for example, those people who didn't go out and vote when we needed them to vote, so we didn't have the Supreme Court justices that we have.
Right. That was a false
choice.
They
made a false choice.
Right.
Right? Because now there's a consequence that goes along with it. So every thought's going to lead to a feeling, right? How your emotions are showing up turns out in a behavior. Now, if that's a maladaptive behavior, we have a negative consequence. If that's a behavior that is fully functional in the ways that create positivity, we have a positive consequence. Right. So the negative consequence of making that choice not to vote gave us what we now have is no more affirmative action.
Right.
For those who believe in abortion, we don't have the right to an abortion, right? For those who wanted to vote, we now are in a place where our voting rights are being diminished considerably. We're sure moving backwards, but that's because, once again, choice. Some people are making the choice to live in those silos that you speak of, where we are so extreme in our perspective that we're saying, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to vote. It doesn't make any difference what I say or what I do, not realizing that it makes so much difference either way you go.
let's say here, okay, we understand that we have created this seafood boil that is now spoiled, right? And instead of us saying, man, we need to just throw out the whole, pot.
Baby with the bathwater.
Right. Baby with the bathwater. We're like, no, just keep it going and add more to it, Are we getting to a point where now we're not even talking about truth? And what I mean by that, like, regardless of stance, they were just truth. And now we're debating logic and truth. And truth is now subjective, which truth is,
I think it's always been
subjective, right?
I think it's always been.
It's always been subjective?
Oh, one person's truth for another's, it's always been subjective. Yeah. That's how we got slavery. Before we got to slavery, right?
Right.
All were free. We didn't have color. We just lived. And then someday someone said, my truth is you are less than me.
Yeah.
And here we go. It's always been that way. It's just a matter of deciding how you're going to function in it, and then what you're going to feed to the next generation, and then how you're going to help them become a more optimistic generation where they see the ability to make change. So you can stay steeped in that seafood boil at the bottom that never gets stirred.
Right.
Or you can rise to the top and begin to help others come off the bottom. It's all about choice.
That makes sense. Quick word from my sponsor. I'll be back with the last couple of my questions.
I literally just tried the best pre-workout on the planet. With Superpower pre-workout, you have increased focus and a power boost every single time you work out. It's not only packed with 225 milligrams of caffeine, but it also has citrulline and creatine. It's insane how much energy and focus I had during my workouts. If you're ready to take your workouts to the next level, then ditch your current pre-workout and get the Superpower pre-workout to be your own hero.
I want y'all to exercise y'all choice and go to www.cvkglobal.store and purchase Superpower. Purchase it all. Okay, so we talk about choice. We talk about building a better society, or more importantly, since society is made up of human beings, building more appropriate individuals, adults, right? Relearning or unlearning bad behaviors, maladjusted behaviors. This person has to recognize there is a level of toxicity that is not cool, right? And it cannot continue. Have we pushed the requirement, and I do think that's how it should be phrased, for mental health in all aspects of life? Because I think if the message was this has to be a needed service, not a selective one or a ancillary one, maybe maybe we don't get January 6th. Maybe something happens. Have we done a good job communicating that message?
Oh, absolutely not. We've separated the two. Physical health and mental health are not seen as being synonymous. And if they were, then we'd have a greater opportunity to recognize that anxiety and depression are real, that personality disorders in all their facets are real. Then we'd be able to understand that the same way that we provide medications and therapy and treatment for those diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, which technically all come out of those stress-related anxiety and depression and so forth, then we would certainly not have a society, particularly in our community, that has comorbidity. I mean, if there is anxiety, you best believe there's somewhere in there hypertension at higher levels. Now, everybody has just a baseline of anxiety, right? That's just a given. But at the higher levels where hypertension and heart disease and then diabetes exist, because now you're eating the wrong things and not exercising as much because of depression and not wanting to move, having low desire for even intimacy and sex drive and so forth. It all stems from the way you think and feel and behave every day of your life. So they do need to go together. We do need to press for that. And in our community, more than ever, we truly need to be thinking about, how do we accept the fact that we cannot pray everything away? We can pray, and we can have faith, and we can believe, and we can have hope. Absolutely. We can affirm ourselves through confessing the word. Absolutely. And where treatment is needed, we need to seek help. I think of it this way. Jesus had 12 disciples. Why? Because he needed help. He couldn't do it on his own.
True.
Each one of them had a purpose, even through crucifixion. Judas had a purpose, and Peter had a purpose.
Yeah.
Each person. Thomas, put your fingers in my hand.
You're right.
They all had a purpose. So why then do we think we don't need anybody?
That's true. And that was a wild group. I said, look, I always, those 12 was a wild, I wouldn't have picked any one of them, but those 12 was a wild group.
They had considerable mental health concerns.
Yes.
They had mental illness. I mean, when you think of it, he cut off a man's ear. He was so pissed off. And Jesus had to go heal the man. Come on now. That's anger issues. He needed some anger management training.
He did.
When we think about it, there truly is this level of believing that we are beyond and above, because Jesus came, he died, and he did. He absolutely did. And therefore we are saved. Absolutely. That is true. And the blood covers all things. Absolutely. And while it's covering, we should be seeking treatment to ensure that it gets into the depths of the pores, the cracks and crevices of every area, so we're whole.
I totally agree, and the gospel has been preached. I couldn't have said it better myself, and that is absolutely true. I don't even know how to add. I was like, there's nothing to add. That was the
I told you my parents are ministers. I told you I come from a preaching family. We don't play.
I see. I was like, that's the fullness of the gospel. And if you want to accept Jesus right now, you can raise your right hand and say, Lord, I believe that you're the Son of God. You died for my sins, and on the third day you rose again. And by that you are saved. Dr. Jeannelle, you have been amazing. Where can the people connect with you and say, hey, look, something obviously is off. However it happened, whatever it happened, I know I need some type of help. How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at DrJeannelle. So that's at Dr. Jeannelle. I'm on TikTok at Dr.JeannelleLMFT. So that's Dr.Jeannelle LMFT on TikTok. And my website is tmicounselingandcoaching.com. And you can go online and get my book, Intimacy, Mastering Black Intimacy for the Relationship You've Always Wanted. It's on Amazon. It's a bestseller.
We got to get you back on just to discuss the book. I wasn't as familiar with the book. We just need to discuss the ins and outs.
That's okay.
And get you back on to actually cover that, because I think, intimacy is needed in marriage couples, and that is, sometimes we want to overlook it, or things that it just, happens, or it stays the course.
And I talk about it very differently. So people think I'm talking just about the sexual side. Ooh, but I dig deeper.
I got to get you back on to cover this. Y'all, connect with Dr. Jeannelle. Hit her up on the ground. Follow her. Go to the website. Purchase the book. And if you want to keep seeing amazing content, I got to do subscribe. YouTube, CVMK. Instagram, it is what it is. Show, CVMK_global, CVMK33. It rings the bell. It all follows the same format. www.cvmkglobal.store. And until next time, guys. Thanks.